The Siege of Tsingtao, 1914, Japan, Germany, and the forgotten Asian front of World War I, when most people think of the First World War. Their minds immediately turn to the trenches of France, the muddy battlefields of Belgium, or the deserts of the Middle East. Yet the Great War was never confined to Europe alone. It was a truly global conflict, stretching from Africa to the Pacific, and drawing distant colonies and leased territories into the firestorm of imperial rivalry. One of the least discussed but strategically significant clashes took place thousands of miles from the Western Front on the shores of China, at the German-held port of Qingdao. This is the story of the 1914 Siege of Tsingtao, a decisive confrontation between Imperial Japan and the German Empire. It was a battle that reshaped power in East Asia, elevated Japan's global status, and quietly laid the groundwork for tensions that would explode 3 decades later in the Pacific War. Germany and Japan in East Asia at the dawn of the 20th century. Germany was a latecomer to imperial competition in Asia. In 1898, exploiting China's weakness after a series of humiliating defeats, Berlin forced the Qing government to lease Jiaozhou Bay for 99 years. At its center stood Qingdao, a modern port city transformed by German engineers into a fortified naval base and model colonial settlement. For Germany, Qingdao served as the anchor of its East Asian presence, a coaling station, a communications hub, and the home base of the Imperial Navy's East Asiatic Squadron. For Japan, however, Germany's foothold in China was an obstacle. Having defeated China in 1895 and Russia in 1905, Japan was rapidly emerging as the dominant military power in East Asia, determined to push European empires out of the region. When war erupted in Europe in August 1914, this rivalry was about to turn violent. Why Japan entered the war, Japan's entry into World War I was not driven by loyalty to Europe, but by opportunity. Since 1902, Japan had been bound to Britain by the Anglo-Japanese alliance, an agreement designed to counter Russian expansion in Asia. When Germany went to war with Britain, Japan was treaty, bound to assist, but Tokyo saw far greater advantages than mere alliance obligations. British officials feared that Germany's East Asiatic Squadron could disrupt merchant shipping across the Indian and Pacific Oceans. They initially asked Japan to help track German warships. Japan responded with a much bolder proposal. It would enter the war directly, eliminate Germany's Asian bases, and neutralize its naval forces in the region. Britain hesitated, privately worrying that Japan would seize German territories for itself rather than return them. Nonetheless, London accepted. Japan now had international legitimacy to expand its influence across East Asia and the Pacific. The ultimatum to Germany on August 15, 1914. Japan issued an ultimatum to Berlin. Germany was ordered to withdraw its warships from Chinese and Japanese waters and to hand over Tsingtao without resistance. Unsurprisingly, Germany refused. 8 days later, on August 23, Japan formally declared war on Germany. The fate of Tsingtao was sealed. The German governor of the colony, Captain Alfred Mayer Waldeck, received clear instructions from Berlin. The settlement was to be defended to the last possible moment. Though Germany knew relief was impossible, resistance would tie down Japanese forces and protect German prestige. The defenders of Tsingtao, Germany's military situation in East Asia, was grim. Most of Vice Admiral Maximilian von Spee's East Asiatic Squadron had already left the region, hoping to evade Allied pursuit across the Pacific. Left behind in Qingdao was a small, improvised force. The German naval contingent consisted of a handful of aging vessels, the torpedo boat S-90, the cruiser Cormoran, several small gunboats, and the Austro-Hungarian cruiser Kaiserin Elizabeth. On land, Meerwaldeck commanded roughly 40 men, a mixture of German Marines, sailors, reservists, naval gunners, and a small Chinese police unit. Tsingtao itself was heavily fortified. 3 defensive lines stretched across the surrounding hills, supported by redoubts, coastal batteries, barbed wire, and minefields. The Germans possessed around 90 artillery pieces, over 100 machine guns, a small motor pool, and 2 early aircraft. Against them stood one of the most modern armies in Asia, the Japanese encirclement on August 27, 1914. The Imperial Japanese Navy began a full blockade of Gyojin Bay under Vice Admiral Sadakichi Kato. British warships soon joined the operation. Japanese forces quickly seized nearby islands and began clearing German naval mines. In early September, Japan landed more than 23,000 soldiers from the 18th Infantry Division under Major General Mitsuomi Kamio. Torrential rains and severe flooding turned the countryside into a swamp, slowing the advance and exhausting the troops. Despite protests from Chinese officials over violated neutrality, Japanese forces pushed inland unopposed. By mid-September, Japanese columns were closing in on Tsingtao from multiple directions. German forces withdrew methodically, abandoning their outer defensive lines to concentrate around the city. The world's first naval air operations, the Siege of Tsingtao, marked a historic milestone in warfare. The Japanese seaplane carrier Wakamiya launched Farman seaplanes to scout German positions, bomb ships, and direct artillery fire. These missions represented the first recorded naval air operations in history. Germany responded with limited aerial reconnaissance. Lieutenant Gunther Pluskow flew daily missions over Japanese lines in a fragile Taube aircraft, dodging anti-aircraft fire and attempting light bombing runs. During one encounter, Pluskow claimed to have shot down a Japanese aircraft with his pistol, possibly the first aerial victory ever claimed. The siege tightens throughout late September and October. Japanese forces methodically advanced their siege lines. Trenches crept closer under constant artillery fire. German counterattacks were launched but achieved little beyond delaying the inevitable. Heavy guns were hauled onto captured hilltops, allowing Japanese artillery to dominate the battlefield. One by one, German ships were scuttled to prevent capture, their guns removed and repurposed for land defense. By the end of October, Tsingtao was isolated, battered, and running out of ammunition. The final bombardment on October 31, 1914, the birthday of Emperor Taisho, Japanese and British naval and field artillery, unleashed a massive bombardment. Hundreds of guns pounded German positions day and night. Redoubts collapsed, power stations were destroyed, and water supplies were cut. Japanese engineers advanced under fire, dismantling barbed wire and preparing assault corridors. German resistance grew increasingly desperate, but their defenses were crumbling. On November 6, Meerwaldeck acknowledged that further resistance would only cost lives. Pluskow was ordered to escape with final dispatches beginning an extraordinary journey that would take him across the globe. The fall of Tsingtao before dawn on November 7, Japanese infantry launched a coordinated assault across the German lines. Fierce hand-to-hand combat erupted in the trenches and hilltop forts. Bayonets, rifles, and swords clashed in brutal close quarters. One by one, the German redoubts fell. By morning, Japanese and British troops marched into Qingdao as white flags appeared across the remaining defenses. After 10 weeks of siege, the German colony had fallen. Aftermath and legacy, Japanese losses totaled over 7 100 dead and more than 200 wounded. German casualties were far lower, but nearly 700 soldiers and sailors were taken prisoner. They were transported to POW camps in Japan, where conditions were notably humane. Many prisoners remained in Japan after the war, starting new lives. For Japan, the victory confirmed its status as a great power and expanded its influence across China and the Pacific. For Germany, Tsingtao became a symbol of distant sacrifice in a global war it could not win. Today, little remains of Germany's colonial presence in Qingdao, except one enduring legacy, the famous Tsingtao brewery, still producing beer inspired by its German origins. The Siege of Tsingtao is a reminder that World War I was not just a European war, but a worldwide struggle that reshaped global power often in places history tends to forget. This has been Unsolved History. More hidden chapters of global conflict are coming soon. The fall of Tsingtao in November 1914 marked far more than the capture of a distant colonial port. It symbolized the shifting balance of global power in the early 20th century. For the first time, an Asian empire had decisively defeated a major European power in a modern, industrial war, and done so on terms recognized by the international community. Japan emerged from the siege stronger, richer, and newly acknowledged as a great power. Its influence across China and the Pacific expanded rapidly, while its confidence and ambitions grew alongside it. Germany, meanwhile, lost its foothold in East Asia, and with it any realistic hope of shaping events in the Pacific for decades to come. Yet, beyond strategy and geopolitics, the siege revealed the brutal realities of modern warfare. Civilians were caught in the crossfire, neutrality was ignored, and new technologies, aircraft, naval bombardment, trench warfare foreshadowed the even greater destruction that would soon engulf the world. The Siege of Tsingtao reminds us that World War I was never just a European war. It was a truly global conflict, fought in forgotten places, with consequences that echoed far beyond the battlefield. In many ways, the road to the Pacific War of the Second World War began here on the hills overlooking Jiaoju Bay. History often remembers the loudest battles, but it is in the quieter, overlooked conflicts like Tsingtao that we find the origins of the world we live in today. If you found this story compelling, make sure to like this video. It helps the channel more than you might think. Subscribe to Unsolved History for more deep dives into forgotten wars, hidden conflicts, and the untold stories that shaped our world. Have a question, theory, or perspective on the Siege of Tsingtao? Leave a comment below. We read everyone, and your insight may shape a future video. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming documentaries exploring the lesser-known chapters of global history. Thank you for watching Unsolved History. Your support allows us to uncover stories that history textbooks often overlook, from lost battles and secret alliances to the hidden consequences of global conflict. More episodes are already on the way, so stay curious, stay questioning, and keep exploring the past with us. Until next time, this is Unsolved History, signing off.